Bonjour, Abby Indigenous. Today I'm going to do my speech and final presentation on academic versus athletic spending. Colleges spend too much money on sports programs versus educational programs. Why does it seem that sports are the moneymaker for the colleges? Sports are considered to be the headliner of schools, which is sometimes in the case where students want to go to the school because of the sports teams, that they're good sports teams. Applications for the colleges, application rates are boosted the year after a big sports championship. So say LSU makes it to the national championship for football and ends up winning. The year after that, they are going to have a lot more applications put in for the school. These applications usually do decrease after maybe like 2 or 3 years. At schools, it seems as though a Final Four berth for a championship or anything like that is much more bigger than, say, a new library. College sports could be considered a billion-dollar game. How much money do the sports bring in? Television contracts, ticket sales, alumni donations, and licensed apparel are the top moneymakers for these schools. So when you have people watching these on TV, going to the games, the alumni are donating, people are buying the sports gear, this is all bringing in money for the school. Football is a top earning sport and sometimes ends up funding the other programs. So you could have a football team making a ton of money and it's going to fund every other single sport at a school. The institution and government support, donor contributions, ticket sales, and media rights bring in just over 90% of the revenue brought in one single sports season. So if you take the television contract, ticket sales, alumni donations, and licensed apparel, some schools may not do well in all 4 of them, but some schools may. Some schools can maybe do well in 2, 1, it doesn't matter. But these schools are bringing in revenue from 1 or more of those main 4 things. Generated revenue from the athlete. They are spread out over many things. So not as many schools turn a profit every year from athletics as you would think. So you would think maybe all the schools that have sports programs or would make a lot of money for the program. Well, that isn't the case. 25 out of 1,100 schools in 2019 were profitable. So that is a very, very, very small fraction of how many schools actually made a profit compared to how much they spent. $92,000 spent on athletes versus $14,000 for non-athletic full-time students. So you're taking almost $100,000 and spending it on a student athlete, where a non-student athlete is only getting about $15,000, $14,000 spent on the student. So as you can tell, not as many schools are profitable from athletics as you think. Coaches versus professor salaries. LSU's new head coach, Brian Kelly, signed a 10-year, $95 million contract. So this means that he is getting paid $9.5 million every year that he coaches at LSU. The average professor only makes $132,000 a year. So that coach is making approximately 72 times more money as the professor. This money the coaches make could be used on more educational programs. Even if it was half of what the coach is making and it was spent on the education side of the schools, there would be a lot more options and available things to do. March Madness. March Madness brings in most of the NCAA income. 90% of the NCAA income goes back to the colleges. The NCAA pulls in $1 billion a year in revenue from media rights, fees, ticket sales, corporate sponsorships, and proliferation of television ads around the 3-week-long tournament. The coronavirus pandemic with schools. During this pandemic, canceled events have cut schools' money that has been earned and given to the schools. So let's say that the basketball team missed the season, they're getting cut money from the NCAA and the school, which are given to the sports programs. Schools lost out on $375 million in 2019 from the pandemic. They were given $225 million instead of the usual $600 million that they would have gotten if the pandemic would have never happened. During the pandemic, scholarships were reduced and coaches also were cut. Sports don't make all the money at schools. College sports are self-serving and some of them are not self-serving. The NCAA receives most of its annual revenue from two sources and is distributed in more than a dozen ways. The NCAA directly supports the schools, conferences, and nearly 500,000 student athletes. So if you think about that, the NCAA is supporting the schools, the conferences that the sports play in, and all of the student athletes who play for the NCAA. In the end, colleges do spend a lot of money on the sports. Whether it's the sports earning the money and spending them on themselves, or if it's colleges' other money getting spent on the sports. Sports do bring in a lot of revenue, but they are not always profitable. Colleges are always willing to spend money on sports. If a college is spending money on a sports team that is doing well, that college is going to boost the applications and bring more money to the school just by people applying and getting in. What would to happen if we were to put more money towards the education programs as well? Thank you.